Quin village lies east of Ennis, offering a gateway to the East Clare hinterland. The immediate area first arose as settlement around Thomas de Clare's castle in 1278 AD. Not too long afterwards, in 1318, the fortification was attacked and destroyed by the Gaelic McNamaras. The present Friary was built on the remains of the Norman castle about 1350, incorporating part of the castle rooms. This building still stands at the heart of the Quin community. Quin, or Quinca in Irish, means arbutus abounding, with Fé Quin or arbutus wood at the east end of the village. Once in the Gaelic district of Cashin, Quin was McNamara territory from the 5th to the 14th century. Some of their strongholds remain at Cahercalla, Danganbrack, Castlefergus and the Pogue. Quin environs are rich in heritage. Out from the village are clues in the landscape of much older stories. Hill forts, most importantly Mahon, assembly sites and crannogs point to occupancy in the late Bronze Age. The principal and busy highway from Limerick once passed through Quin village, where the roads then branched off in several directions. This made the village a gathering point for important events. It was at the Great Fair of Quin that news of the 1641 rebellion was first made public in the county. Cattle fairs continued here until the early 20th century. Quin has been shaped and coloured by those who went before the current time. Our Bronze Age, Iron Age, medieval and early modern ancestors all left evidence of their stopovers in the landscape. Their rich legacy is what we now wish to explore. Today Quin retains its unique village atmosphere, while at the same time adapting to an increasing and vibrant population, ever conscious of its rich legacy that lies all around. Sometime in the Bronze Age, the inhabitants of the Burn in northwest Clare began a slow migration south. They left because after many centuries the thin soils of the Burn were exhausted and no longer viable for farming. The slow migration over many years is discernible by a long series of Fenlow or cooking pits running diagonally across the Clare landscape from the Burn to the Shannon. Once they reached the Shannon, the Bronze Age was settled. Here was rich land and good fishing. Signs of their presence east of Quin are multifold. In the late Bronze Age, they asserted their presence by the construction of the enormous trivalent fort on Mahon Hill, north of Newmarket and Fergus, in the year about 950 BC. It was the great centre around which large communities of Bronze Age people settled. Standing stones emanating from Mahon can be seen at Drummond. Today, as we reach back 3,000 years, remains of our ancestors' presence are plentiful. However, much of their archaeology is dispersed, while other sections have been absorbed into the local landscape. It takes a little searching to trace the remaining clues. Nevertheless, in the general area around Quin, there is substantial evidence of Bronze Age settlement. Cooking pits, stone alignments, wedge tombs, crannogs, henges and lone standing stones are all to be found in the local landscape. In the Shannon and Fergus rivers are remnants of fish traps, causeways and sunken canoes, all pointing to an industrious past. Their activities created wealth, as demonstrated by the magnificent Bronze Age gold find at Ballycar, close to Mahon, in 1854. The overall collection of artefacts make up the Bronze Age story that is an intimate part of East Clare, but which may not yet be fully appreciated. Near to Quin is the stone alignment at Clooney. In local folklore it is associated with St. McCullough and is known as Cnoc na Farbrega, the hill of the false men. In Castlefergus townland is a fine example of a Fenlow fia, a cooking trough, carefully preserved by the landowner. There is an excellent example of a wedge tomb at Ballyhickey, close to the football field. Remains of crannogs, which are man-made islands, are found in Fionlock and Knocknalappa Lake. There is what may be a well-preserved Bronze Age henge, or at least an oenach, or assembly site on Hassett's farm beside the River Rhine at Cogon. A henge is a ring-shaped bank and ditch, with the ditch inside the bank indicating it was not for defensive purpose. purposes. Locally, it is presented as a large sunken circle of about 30 metres in diameter, stretching across 2 fields. Elsewhere, lone standing stones, some of which were utilised up to medieval times, can be seen on the royal route from Cala Fort to Mahadaya. The McNamara clan knew the value of these prehistoric reminders and preserved part of an ancient stone cursus in the grounds of Napo Castle. Scattered bronze edge material is still being found all over East Clare out to the Broadford Pass. So perhaps without realising it, Quin and its environs lie at the heart of an enormously rich bronze edge landscape that will no doubt continue to teach and surprise us into the future. The medieval inauguration mound of Mahadaya, the plain of Adair, is situated in a natural amphitheatre 4 kilometres northeast of Quin village. On many occasions in the first millennium, a Dalcassian O'Brien was inaugurated as Ri Moon, King of Thomond here. The ceremonies were presided over by the local Cashan representatives, the McNamaras, in whose territory the mound stood. On inauguration day, the royal ceremonies most likely began at Cahercalla, High Status Ring Fort close by. Here, under the auspices of the McNamaras, the O'Brien candidate would make his preparations for the inauguration. Then, with the McNamaras and other groups and allies, and possibly some religious figures, the O'Brien would make his way along the traditional route from the fort to the mound, a journey of no more than 15 minutes. Some traces of this route are still visible in the landscape, marked by standing stones. Mahadaya Mound is bounded on the north and east by a curving ridge, with Hell River, on Ifrin, immediately to the southwest. Around the mound is a fosse. It in turn is surrounded by an earthen bank adapted to its outline. The mound is about 20 feet at its highest point, with a smaller, separate cairn to its northwest. This too had a role in the inauguration ceremonies. An earthen bridge links the mound to its surrounds. The honour of protecting this earthen bridge was given to allied chieftains of the O'Brien on the day. At the front of the embankment is a large balawn or basin stone, while on the opposite bank of the river is a lone standing stone within the ritual space. Surrounding the face of the mound is a natural rise that served as a gallery. From here, the ceremonies could be witnessed. The ceremonial mound may be a ring barrow reused as an inauguration site. The appropriation of prehistoric ceremonial landscapes by medieval dynasties as assembly and inauguration sites is a recurrent theme in Irish history. No scientific excavations of the Mahadaya inauguration platform have yet been made. 7 O'Brien inaugurations were performed here between 1242 and 1313, with Mock Conmara members officiating at the ceremony in each case. Some later inaugurations were also documented after that of Donegal O'Brien in 1313, and they went on into the 15th century. Typical of the internecine warfare that went on between Irish tribes, the annals tell us that in AD 982, Neil Shocknell, king of Tara, cut down a sacred tree, or billa, at Mahadaya. Again, in 1051, E. O'Connor, king of Connacht, cut down another tree sacred to the O'Briens. In March 1395, in the fields around Mahadaya, the place where he had received his power according to Irish custom, Diarmuid O'Brien, in the presence of Thomas, Earl of Nottingham, restated his pledge to the English administration. This slow diminishment of Irish power would eventually lead to Murca Corach O'Brien, in a legal act of surrender and regrant, give up his realm to the Kingdom of Ireland in 1543, and instead accept the titles Baron Inchu Quin and Earl of Thomond. Gaelic rule in Thomond effectively ended that day. The Franciscan Friary in Quin is a cluster of buildings that form the focal point of the village. The Friary stands on the ruins of the Norman castle that was built by Thomas de Clare in 1280 to assert his power in Thomond. He chose his site badly, as it sat right in the heart of McNamara's territory, Gaelic y Casheen. In 1318, the McNamaras razed the castle to the grounds. So began a checkered history for the site. In 1402, Shida Com McNamara, commenced the Friary construction as his family's burial place on the ruins of the Clares fortification. Through an edict of Pope Eugene IV, Macon McNamara gave the Friary to the Franciscans of the regular observance in 1433, who added to the structure by further building. The Friary, one of the best preserved of its kind in Ireland, was in use until suppressed by King Henry VIII in 1541. In 1584, just after the Second Desmond Rebellion, Sir John Perrott, Lord Deputy of Ireland, set fire to the Friary during an attack. On the same visit, he smashed the bones of Concha Beag O'Brien and had his body suspended from the steeple until dead. In 1640, the building recovered sufficiently to become a college with a significant enrolment of students. In 1671, it was further restored, but never quite regained its former status. Eventually, in 1760, the friars were conclusively expelled. However, one friar, John Hogan, stayed there until his death in 1820, by which time most of the buildings were in ruin. The entrance to the Abbey is at the western end of the church through a round-headed doorway with a pair of lancet windows overhead. Inserted into the south wall, inside the main entrance, is a waterfront or stoop, which has the same tier-con vaulting as beneath the roof of the tower. In the 15th century transept on the south wall, a double piscina for cleaning altarware occupies the southeast corner of the room. John Fireball McNamara, the last of the Cashin clan, who did so much for the Friary, is buried here. The church comprises a nave and chancel with a tall, slender crossing beneath the tower and belfry. The south and east walls utilise the foundations of the earlier castle. To the north of the nave is a very fine cloister with the dormitory, refectory, chapter room arranged around it. The cloister arcades are slightly pointed arches in pairs with sloping buttresses separating them. In the northeast corner of the cloister ambulatory lies the grave of John Hogan, Quin's last friar. A spiral stairs here leads to the upper floor and the dormitories. The original high altar is still in place under the east window. There are several wall tombs within the church, including that of Hugh McNamara in the north wall. The tomb was built about 1450. Behind this wall lies the sacristy. Traces of a rare 17th century stucco crucifixion scene can still be seen over the sedilia on the south wall of the chancel. The bell tower has 3 levels marked externally by string courses. Outside the abbey, the west wall has a remarkable pair of windows with cusped, ogee-shaped heads and hood mouldings ending in floral designs. The lavatorium and communal washrooms lie separately across a gantry to the north of the Friary. There are many other notable features to be seen here that are best explored during your own visit. Quin is fortunate to have such a storied building, brimming with architectural interest and resonating with echoes of the past in its village. St. Finian's Church in Quin village is several centuries older than its neighbouring sister building, Quin Abbey. It is in a reasonable state of preservation, though the north wall has long since been lost. The church may be accessed by way of the footbridge from Quin Abbey or from the main street. Both the interior of the church and the area around the church are now filled with graves. Its main features are the remains of a moulded window in the south wall and a 13-foot wide opening in the east gable window. A square tower 60 feet in height was built in the 16th century at the corner of the west gable with a low door opening into the church. Careful scrutiny will show the presence of 2 heads beneath the tower string. The annals of the Four Masters state that St. Finian was a patron of Quin parish. In 1005, Finian of Roscrea, who may have been the same individual, died. O'Hanlon's Lives of the Irish Saints place his feast day as the 5th of February. The foundation date of Finian's church is not known. Some documents and a few architectural features would suggest the early 13th century. The Four Masters record the church being burnt in 1278. In the absence of hard facts, local folklore stated that the old church of Quin stands at the other side of the stream. It is called Teampall Finian from Finian Mac Connemara, and was built in one night by the angels. An architectural article from 1908 recorded that the old church is a plain rectangle about 79 feet by 27 feet, not divided by nave and chancel. A small square tower stands at the southwest corner. The walls are mainly of 13th century date. Several later features have been added, such as the battering buttresses at the east end and the tower itself. In the last century it fell into ruin. To the south of Feneen stood a small Church of Ireland chapel in use until the late 19th century. Due to lack of use, the building was removed in the 1960s. Though somewhat overshadowed by Quin Friary, which is close by, St. Feneen's is a venerable church, still treasured by the local community. In the general Quin area, there were three types of homes still to be seen that were lived in by the ruling classes through the ages. The earliest type was used by Quin's Gaelic overlords in the Iron Age and later, generally described as ring forts. The particular one in mind is found in Caracalla townland, approximately 4 kilometres from Quin village. This was a high status fort, indicated by its 3 concentric walls or ballets. It was home to the ruling McNamaras of Cashin. From here they conducted their business over a vast territory while maintaining a tight political friendship with the Dalcassian O'Briens. The Anglo-Normans who began arriving in the 12th century were a military-minded people, whose dwellings were a mixture of fortification and family home. These new building styles appealed to the wealthy Irish. The Gaelic McNamaras, in imitation of the Normans, began to build their own tower houses. In a splurge of activity, they ended up with no fewer than 42 buildings across their territories. In a 16th century document entitled The Description of Ireland and the State thereof as it is at this present time in Anno 1598, no less than 9 Gaelic tower houses were recorded in the greater Quin area. Many of these dwellings are still extant. We have Dangan Ivigane Castle, which is situated in the grounds of Dangan House, approximately 5 kilometres northeast of Quin village. This was a mid-14th century tower house. The keep and banquet hall were built of quality limestone. In 1542, Shida McNamara surrendered his castles and lands in the barony of Dangan to the English crown. John McNamara still owned Dangan Ivigeen and Dangan Brack castles in 1584, according to the Trinity College list. The McNamaras withdrew some of their holdings to 2 transplanted Catholic families, the Crays and the Whites. The Poe Castle was built by Sean McCon, the son of Shida McNamara, in 1467. In the mid-17th century it became a Cromwellian garrison, as the McNamaras had supported the Royalist cause. After the restoration of the English monarchy, the McNamaras regained the Pogue. Francis McNamara sold it to the Scott family in 1800. In 1855, Theobald Fitzwalter Butler bought it and turned it into the family seat of the Dunboyne clan. American Mark Edwin Andrews bought it in 1966. With his wife Lavona, a prominent architect in the States, he carried out extensive restorations before leasing part of the castle to the Irish government as a cultural and tourist amenity. The castle is now a medieval banquet venue and guided tours are arranged daily during the tourist season. Ballykilty Manor was a property of John McNamara in 1614. An inscription on the kitchen mantelpiece dating from that year states that John and his wife Honora Clancy built the chimneys. William Cray occupied the building as a tenant of the Earl of Thomond, one of the O'Briens, in 1661. John Blood purchased the lease of Ballykilty in 1785. It remained in the Blood family until 1968. Danganbrack Castle was mentioned by Eugene O'Curry in his letters when he passed through Quin in 1835. He wrote, "Danganbrack is a large square building with 4 gables and chimneys within 2 fields of Quin Abbey. It belonged to the McNamaras and remains in good preservation, and though part of the roof has fallen in, it is still inhabited. By 1800, John McNamara had sold the tower house to the Scott family. Danganbrack is now a ruin. It stands beside the Rhine River." Mahon Castle is in a wooded area at the edge of the Dromorn domain, once O'Brien property. It is described as Mucon and was owned by Conor Clancy. It stands on Mahon Hill, a few metres from the outer wall of the late Bronze Age hill fort. It is in private ownership. Castle Fergus or Ballyhannon Castle. The castle was built about 1490 by Hugh, son of Donnacha McNamara. The Fergus in this title is drawn from the River Fergus nearby, while its other name, Ballyhannon, is taken from the Hannons, a Dalcassian sept whose patrimonial lands were in the area. Samuel Luce wrote in 1837 that Castle Fergus was the fine modern residence of William Smith Blood. The Tower House was bought and greatly renovated in 1970. It now provides exclusive holiday accommodation. My Risk House. Samuel Luce wrote that the finely wooded property of Lord Fitzgerald and VC was bought by his father from the McNamaras. The house was originally built in 1790 and was occupied by George Sampson in 1837. It was a 3-bay, 2-storey house with hipped slate roof, brick chimney stacks and dentelated eaves course. As well as being the birthplace of John Fireball McNamara, it later was the home of William V.C. Fitzgerald, who stood for election as MP in Ennis in 1828, only to be defeated by Daniel O'Connell. My Risk house was accidentally burnt in 1875. The last and final elite home in our list has a slightly different story to the others, having no Gaelic antecedents. Quinville Abbey House is a period house on the outskirts of Quin village. The original occupiers, Singletons, came from Lancashire with no previous Clare connections. They settled in the county at the end of the 17th century. John Singleton married Marcella Dalton of Deer Park. Their second son, Edward Dalton Singleton, lived at Quinville, followed by 3 generations of his descendants. The Singletons were a talented family, producing both artists and statesmen. The male line died out in the 19th century. Quinville Abbey House subsequently became the property of James Butler Ivers. It is now a private home. Fenlow Celtic monastic site lies at the edge of the neighbouring parish of Newmarket-on-Fergus, east of Quin. But the visitor is a hidden gem that needs to be sought out. As so often the case with Irish monks, they located their church in a place of quiet beauty. The present church, built in the 15th century, overlooks Fionloch. Fenlow's site, sometimes described as Tom Fenlow, comes from the Irish tomb Fionloch, the tomb of the fair lake, as recorded in the annals of the Four Masters. The church indicates 3 separate building phases. Large blocks of masonry around the door of the south wall represent the earliest phase, with construction dates between the 10th and 12th century. Early in the 14th century, the church was restored and some fine cut sandstone windows were inserted in the south wall and east gable by the Anglo-Normans. Finally, in the 15th century, the triple light east window was blocked off and a light trefoil pointed limestone opening was inserted. One gets a sense of the antiquity of the site by its gravestones. Here lie hundreds of markers placed at the head and the foot of the graves, all without inscriptions. Inscribed headstones did not come into popular use until the end of the 17th century, suggesting that many of those buried here predate this time. Saint Luchagern or Luke Kern is a 6th century saint associated with the site. He was almost forgotten until rediscovered by Clare's great antiquarian T.J. Westrop. As well as being a holy man, Luchagern had a gift. A woman suffering from the plague came to him one day. He prayed over her and placing his hands on her suppurations, he drove all evidence of illness from her into a large stone nearby. The stone was thereafter called the Plague Stone and is still present on the exterior face of the wall here. It has 2 raised circles, one with an inner circle and the second the shape of a cross. They are said to imitate the pustules that appear on the skin when afflicted by the plague. Luchagern have endowed the stone with curative powers against disease, drew large numbers of people here seeking cures. There are 3 Romanesque carved heads inserted into the southeastern corner of the graveyard here. One is of limestone and two of sandstone. They are said to represent Luke de Jern's disciples. The heads are closely associated with the plague stone story. When Luke de Jern challenged his three disciples about his miraculous healing gift, only one monk fully accepted it. He is now represented by the intact stone head on the wall. The other two heads, greatly eroded, signified the doubters. An old practice at Fenlow continues from an earlier era. When the coffin reaches the graveyard, it is not carried directly to its final resting place. Instead, the bearers enter the main gate and then exit at once through the side gate to the west. They move up the field about 60 metres, where a coffin rest allows the coffin to be placed. It is then received into the graveyard from across the wall before continuing to its grave site. There are all kinds of explanations for this. A tradition from the days when coffins were shouldered to the graveyard, to avoid financial costs, to avoid moving in straight lines with the dead, to not rush the final journey. Whatever the explanation, it is a venerable custom that is still maintained. There is a holy well at the front of the Fenlow site. It is in two parts. The first is a basin or ballon well inserted in the wall. Below it is a spring contained in a grotto-like structure, which was refurbished by locals in 1959. Both water sources are still much visited. They permit the visitor to take some of the graces of Fenlow Monastery home with them. This completes the heritage story of Quin for now. We hope you found something of interest. Please feel free to visit us sometime. We would love to meet with you. Buick is flat as Port the Glocka is scale or Neuracht.